Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Mark Victor Hansen, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited for our time together. I barely slept last night. I just want you to know, I'm a little starstruck, okay? The best-selling author of nonfiction in the world is on my podcast. I have no idea what I did right to deserve this, but I'm sure I feel blessed, and I'm so thankful that you're here. So with your permission, just like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go up to today, and then we want to talk about this new book you have out called Ask, with an exclamation point. Thanks for being here, bud.
My great pleasure. You've just got the right energy. What it says is you're supposed to go from glory to glory, and you look up glory, it means two things. It means radiance, and we're talking about spiritual, energetic soul radiance, which is what I wrote about in the Chicken Soup of the Soul books with Jack, and I'm the seminal writer. That's a big word. Anyhow, and the other thing is splendor, and you're supposed to have a splendiferous life. And you can tell by the countenance of your energy. And one more thing, I know I'm judging you, and I'm not, it's your show and I'm judging you, but everybody listening around the world in 60 countries is going to get it. Ladies and gentlemen, because some of you are watching, a lot of you are listening by phone, and some of you don't have video maybe, but this guy, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who is 5 generations back from my great teacher in graduate school, said, who you are speaks so loudly I can't hear what you're saying. And you can feel a person's life force energy. This guy's got great life force energy.
Thank you, sir.
That's what I want you all to know, even before we start. So we were friends that just never met until this. And I'm going to hitchhike one other thing with your permission. A lot of the people, like I wrote 1 Minute Millionaire, and I've been on so many podcasts where the guy said, or let me just do the lady. Adlai Kinsman said, I wanted to go on her podcast because she's the only one with 1 billion views. And I can't get to her. And I say I'm never more than 2 calls away from anyone I want to get with because I'm the world's best-selling author, right? Big deal, right? So I read all the podcasts she's been on. I did a little book called The Richest Kids in America, How They Got That Way, and you can too. And one of the kids that interviewed her, well, he's no kid now, he's 24, so he's a big, like your daughter. Anyhow, and I said, you got Adlai's number, give it to me. He texts her and says, Adlai, this guy wants to talk to you. She writes back within a nanosecond and said, you made me rich. I was the number one, I was Miss Tennessee. I was a top country singer, and lawyers stole all my money, all my name, all my fame, all the stuff I'd written. All of a sudden I read your 1 Minute Millionaire, and you're talking about your friend Nora Roberts, who has 4 pseudonyms because she's like you. She writes too fast.
Yeah.
She writes a book almost every other week and has J.D. Robb as Nora Roberts and everything. And said, I never thought I could do a pseudonym. I didn't even know what a pseudonym was. And I got a new name. And now I'm, making 8 figures a year because of you, because of your book, 1 Minute Millionaire. I go, this is so cool. I'm meeting people that I couldn't meet if I didn't do books. Everybody ought to do their book because it'll get you a new fan club, a new friend club, a new life, and a new life force energy.
Yeah, you wrote a book called You've Got a Book in You.
Exactly.
I love it. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you, sir. I'm humbled. I'm absolutely humbled. Thank you. So let's start with where you were born.
I was born in a little city called Waukegan, Illinois. It's a little Danish place. I mean, growing up, my parents, mom and dad, were both from Denmark, came out during the war because my uncle created a black band where we talked the Jews into Denmark during World War II. And then Uncle Sven gave my dad $100 and a passport and said, you're out of here. I'll kiss both cheeks. You're never going to see your big brother 14 years older again because Hitler wants to kill me and you. So you're out of here. Gets you with no English, ends up, he knew the trade of a baker already because you apprenticed in 4th grade. and was really good at it. And I thought everybody was Danish with blonde hair once when I had it and blue eyes. And it was really great. It was a great place to grow up, but it was a labor city. And my dad said, well, you're going to do this. And the whole school system's metal shop, wood shop, and all that. And I said, Dad, I don't know what a white glove guy is, but I'm pretty sure I'm one. He said, you figure it out, kid, then, because I want to have you take over the bakery. I said, look, my brothers and I, none of us did that. We all have done exceedingly well. But I said, Dad, you've given us a good mind and a good start. And he came to my seminars in the old days, and he'd tell everybody, that's my boy.
Yeah.
And just couldn't
how
believe
cool.
that I could, it was beyond great. And then my mom died. I'm going too far, I think, but I took him on a free trip to first class to Hawaii, where he always wanted to go and could never afford it. He didn't have any money. And he said, are you sure you can do this? I said, Dad, I'm already a multimillionaire. You don't have to worry. The trip's paid for, and you're going to have a good time. And we got with one of my friends over there who's old money and had no husband left. And we were out playing chicken in the Pacific Ocean. And I'd never fought my dad because he was big and strong, carried around 200-pound bags of flour. And we're playing chicken in the ocean. He is really strong, and you just don't mess with the old man. I always thought you shouldn't, but then I really found out. Did I go too far in that?
No, you're fine. You're fine. You're doing great. He's old
well,
Danish strong, right? You just don't mess with that.
Yeah, so he was a real Viking strong, right?
So you were born in Waukegan. Did you grow up there?
Yeah, I spent the first 18 years there, and then went to Southern Illinois University, where I almost failed out the first quarter because I thought you were supposed to party. And the dean says, you don't really want to be here, do you? I said, I'm paying my own way. I think I do want to be here. So then I got straight A's in graduate school and all that stuff, and got with the smartest guy on the planet, Bucky Fuller, who is Einstein's best student, arguably, with lots of inventions, 40 books. And he and I traveled with him for 7 years trying to say, how do I, because he wanted to make the world work for 100% of humanity. And he said, I want the young world to really catch this, that we can all be physically, economically, spiritually alive and well and healthy and complete. And it was no philosophy that I'd grown up with, that there's fundamental abundance available for the first time because of technology, which is exactly where we are 50 years, 60 years later, right? We have technology that we're going to press a button, have robotics, have AI, AG, some of you don't know these words, artificial intelligence, which isn't artificial, it's just computer intelligence. But let me talk to that. What Bucky taught me, which I meditated on before, like you stayed up, I stay up thinking about what I want to share. Bucky said, you got brain, but that's just imploded, all the stuff you learn in school. But you got mind, which can think. It's got intuition. It's got imagination. It's got reasoning. It's got 7 powers. But the point is, mind power is what we need now. We got a lot, and not behind power. We need, right? A lot of people have good brain input, but they're not using their mind, where you abstract it, or you do in the Bible, you'd call it an exegesis. You read it, but then you figure out, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to the whole world? And how do I execute it and make it work?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's a big, big thing, right? What you let in, you're to blame for. Right?
Well, I've never heard it said that way. I hope you put that in your book. That's a great
It's going
line.
In the book, baby. It's going in the book.
Yeah, because what happens is what you put in is either an eye opener or an eye blinder.
Exactly. It's either going to be something that's going to be positive, or it's something that's going to be negative. And if you put something positive in there, if you feed your mind and you feed your soul, right, you can come up with things you would never dream of. But you have to get in that place. And the only way you get in that place is you make sure that you monitor and govern what you let in.
So when I'm bankrupt and upside down back in 1974, I was reading all the bad news fit to print, and because most news is bad news, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking about normal media.
If it bleeds, it leads, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Great line. And I immediately shut that off. Only listen to audio tapes. Now I'm older than you, so the first tape recorders were this big. I mean, I'm literally, they were 1.5 feet long, and I'm driving around this beat up old Volkswagen like this with this tape recorder, and I listened to one tape 287 times. You're either the creature, circumstance, or the creator. Yeah. And I thought, man, I created this bankruptcy, so I can create it and I can recreate it. And what is it that I want now? What is it I want 5 years? And I'm going to live to be 127 with options for renewal, because you're into biography.
Right.
Genesis 3:6 says your minimum 120 years. What did most people do? They got everyone was dying when my dad was born at 47 years old, and I did a book with Art Linkletter, and then suddenly we had a Social Security was 65 because they weren't going to pay. There's no money.
Right.
And I teach any question you ask, a goal you set, you're going to get, because the size of your question determines the size of your result. I'm going to live 65 or 70 because I'm going to rip off Social Security and they're going to pay me for having worked so hard. No, you're never supposed to quit on you. That's what, when you and I, before we started, we're saying, look, if you're going to have possession of yourself, sovereignty of yourself, decide what are the magnificent things you want to do during your lifetime. And look, I got another 50 years minimum with options for renewal of what I want to do. And it's all in writing. You know, everyone ought to have their own little journal, whatever you call it. Mine, I wrote there, bursting with big, life-changing, brilliant ideas, because I don't want little crappy ideas, because you're going to be here. You're going to look back and you're either going to be full of regard for, whoa, that really worked, or regret. What the heck was I thinking?
Exactly. No, I totally agree. What was your favorite thing about growing up in Waukegan?
Because my parents were immigrants at such a young age, they didn't have books. We didn't have any books in my house. So I'm 16 years old, and my high school teacher, this guy was a thespian. He was interesting. He knew everything. He knew politics, and he'd come in, and he was as big as I am now, 6'4", and he'd always have great clothes, and he'd be shaking his change in his hand, and he'd slam down his desk and say, okay, last night you read Shakespeare. How does that relate to what Walter Cronkite said about JFK? I thought, Marcus, tell us. And he expected you to know. It wasn't like he brought us up to a new level, because he expected us to all get A's, but he said, you'll get A's, but you're going to really study. Here's what I can cry, because
I love this guy.
JFK got killed when I was in Mr. Reinhardt's class at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at Waukegan Township High School. And he said, call your parents, you're not going home. The hell kind of parents that? Our teachers to tell our parents we're not coming home. He said, we're going to talk about JFK until we're done. Yeah. Holy cow, because he made us read Camelot. We knew what Camelot was. We all had to go to the play Camelot in Chicago, which is like a schlep, an hour and a half drive away, right? And it was like such an extraordinary experience, because here this guy is saying you're going to do it. And then he'd have us come over to his house and do stuff that no one's would have you do. And when I got there, his wife said, look, Mark, and I had a little rock group by that time. I had the Messengers, which my wife says prophetic of what's going to happen in your life. And some nights making more in a night than my dad made in a year. But she said, Ellen, his wife said, Johnny, Mr. Reinhardt to you kids, but would have books on the ceiling. If the ceiling would only hold him, that's how much he loves it. And he would let us go with him to the bookstore, and he'd say, if you haven't read this, you better read that. And you go, this is what we're talking about here is you be a great, inspiring teacher. And one of the books we're doing now is a guy who wants to have high-performing grandparents. And we think grandparents need to be more intimate intellectually and spiritually and emotionally to their kids. And as you know, I got 6 grandkids, but we think before the game's over, because they're still young, that we'll have 12, and we're elated about that. And we have grandparents' night where they sleep over, we got a big house, and they get to stay with just us and tell us what's happening and not happening.
Yeah. So what are those conversations like with your grandkids on the sleepovers?
So we got a 12-year-old who last year was president of a student class with 800 little girls going, and I didn't help him write his speech. He just knows that it's important to be a great communicator. It's important to be a great reader and thinker. And he's an honor student and gifted, of course, and we love him. But they go, Everett. So Everett, I say, Everett, Grampy goal setting is goal getting. What do you want to be? And never thinking he'd have an answer.
Right.
He does 100 3-pointers a day. So basketball is his avocation. I've taken him to the Harlem Globetrotters and the Suns games and all that.
Beautiful.
Appearance and all that, because we're a little affluent. So we can do that kind of stuff. And that's why you got to have money freedom so you can do all the other freedoms, which we can talk about later if you want. Anyhow, he says, well, Grampy, at 18, I'm going to make $30 million a year being a Phoenix Sun. I said, right, cool. What then? He said, then I'm going to manage them. Not thinking he'd have another answer. I said, then what? He said, then I'm going to buy them. I said, boy, do you know what that costs? He said, $4.8 billion is what they just paid. I said, I'm not helping you with that. He said, oh, I have money, Grandpa. You don't have to worry. He probably will. He makes $1,000 a month house guarding his neighbor. He lives in a good neighborhood here in Arizona, but takes $20 to water the plants, take out the dog, make sure the place didn't get robbed, and all the neighbors want him, right? And he still grades and still does his basketball and all that. It just so in answer to your question is that but I can tell you that one about every one of the kids, and I know what they're thinking, and they write me letters, and I say, look, the stuff you can't ask your parents, you can ask me.
Yeah.
I'm not always going to have the answer, but I'll do the best I can. And if I don't know, then we go to the real boss. She knows everything.
Right. Exactly. Right. She's right down the hall.
She goes by Mimi in this family, but ask Grammy Mimi. So she'll answer anything. Right.
So the reason I asked is I believe you're an example.
Thank you.
And I wanted to acknowledge you for it.
I appreciate that.
You care enough about your grandkids to ask.
Yeah.
And I believe there are more grandparents and parents, mind you, that need to do that. One of the things that you don't know is my father's 81st birthday is today.
Happy birthday, to your dad.
Yeah, Larry's his name. He's a great guy. So one of the things that has happened in this podcast, and we're at episode 318, as I mentioned to you before we started, is we're having an ongoing conversation. Sort of the thread is the power of questions and how that affects leadership. And specifically, we talk about parenting a lot, and I believe that is sacred leadership. And I want people to understand that parents need to ask. And I want you to know this. I prepared a little bit for this interview, and I listened to a YouTube interview that you did on a podcast. And you mentioned that when you have little ones, when you have children, as a parent, you just need to ask them. You need to ask all the time, ask them questions all the time. And I love that. It made me think of a situation where I had a client who I was meeting with, and I was trying to talk him out of buying a property, and because it was a bad deal. And he just kind of checked out on me mentally. And so I asked him, I said, what's going on? And he said, well, you know, our firstborn is like 1. And I said, yeah. And he said, I'm worried about him. We just made an appointment for him to be evaluated on the autism spectrum next week. And I said, okay, that's not the same kid that's been riding around in your car. And when I'm on the phone with you, he talks baby talk because he wants to be in the conversation worse than you and I do. I literally would have conversations with him, Mark, over the speakerphone. You can't understand a thing he's saying, but I would ask him questions, right? And he'd answer me. And I said, how long has it been since he spoke? He said, 2 months. I said, okay. When you go home, what do you do? He said, I grab him, I pick him up, I kiss him, I hug him, and tell him I love him. And I said, what else do you do? He said, I talk to him. I said, okay, stop doing that. He said, which part? And I said, stop talking to him. Start asking him questions. He can't answer, but he's programmed to answer. He wants to, I promise you. Ask him questions that you know he can't answer, but just questions. How was your day? How did you do with mama? Did you take good care of mama? Did you go to see the birds? Okay. Did you enjoy the sunshine? Okay. Ask him. So what does he do when he wants something? He said he points and he grunts. And I said, get together with mom because he's got you trained, and tell mom that we're going to make him tell us what that is before we get it for him. He's going to cry, and mama's going to be upset if you don't get on the same page with her. Okay. And she's going to be mad at me, which I can't take. Okay. Right. So I said, make sure you're on the same page, because you know this with your firstborn, they'll act like they're going to whimper, not even cry. And you'll be Superman. You'll be, scaling tall buildings in a single bound, right? With your cape on, trying to get to whatever it is so they won't cry. Okay. They have you trained. So 3 days later, I called him and I said, hey, how's it going? He said, well, we canceled the appointment. And I said, why is that? And he said, we can't get him to shut up. Mark, he was dying to talk. He just needed somebody to ask him. That's what I think is so unbelievably incredible about what you're doing with your grandkids. I love the fact that as a grandparent, you're engaged with them and you care enough to ask. Too many grandparents don't. I mean, they spoil their grandkids, and they fill them with sugar and they send them back to their parents, right? But see, I believe parents need to do that too.
Right.
When a teenager says talk to the hand, we call it the Heisman, okay? When a teenager says talk to the hand, they're literally screaming out for you to love them more, right? And care more about them and stand your ground and show them
Absolutely.
how much you love, okay? Because if you're the parent and they do this, you just throw up your hands and say whatever and walk out the door, you just lost big. Okay? I believe you have to stand your ground and you have to ask them, why are you putting your hand, why are you doing this? What is it about today that made you decide that you had to do this in our relationship? Talk to me. What are you feeling? What's going on with you? Okay? You have to keep asking. And if it doesn't work one way, you ask a different way. But you have to get past that, I believe, as a parent, to effectively parent a kid that's become a teenager. Being a teenager is tough, right? I'm actually working with a 14-year-old right now who lost his dad at 52 3 months ago.
Sorry.
He is in an academy. He is miserable. He's called the police twice on his parents and his uncle. Or his mom and his uncle. This kid is just so unbelievably bottled up. Nobody's ever asked him anything. They've always just ordered him around. I'm in there asking him questions and I'm connecting with him. Okay. I'm pulling him out. I'm getting this stuff out of him, but it's only because I'm asking him. You with me?
Totally, 100%. Every kid
I just feel like it's so important that we talk about it, Anyway, I wanted to acknowledge you for it because I believe that you're an amazing grandparent and I love the leader that you are. And I love the fact that you wrote this book called Ask that we're going to talk about in a little while. By the way, just a real quick factoid. Do you know there's a very, very successful businessman who's not with us anymore, unfortunately, whose father was a baker?
Who's that?
He owned the San Diego Chargers.
Really?
He owned the San Diego Chargers. Alex Spanos.
Oh, Spanos was best friends with one of my heroes, Bob Hope.
Yeah. So Alex Spanos, well, he met Conrad Hilton through Bob Hope. That's how he ended up buying the Conrad Hilton owned the Chargers at the time.
Wow.
Isn't that wild?
Is Spanos still alive?
No, he passed away a few years ago. He and his wife Faye both passed away in the same year. But I read his biography, right? And
dude, me too. I've read 6,000 biographies. They're all
here. It's called Share the Wealth for anybody that's listening. If they want to get it, but it's amazing, absolutely amazing. Anyway, so I just wanted to throw that out there. So you're in great stead, right? You're in great hands. So you go in high school. I think I know the answer to this, but in high school you had a favorite teacher, Mr. Reinhardt, right? Who's famous now, right? Because I mean, you talk about him all the time. Was he your English teacher?
Yeah.
Was English your favorite subject?
It became my favorite because if you got a great and inspiring teacher, every subject has a great and inspiring teacher. And what I learned from him is then when I went to the university, I audited all the classes.
Yeah.
The great teacher, because there were 7 people. We were at a big school with 64,000 people. So there are a lot of classes in history, but there's one guy or lady that was great, or French, or whatever the language, whatever I had to take. And John Reinhardt so impressed me that when I won the Book of the Year award in front of 60,000 people at McCormick Place in Chicago, I called up Mr. and Ms. Reinhardt. I said, I'd like to celebrate you. And I introduced them to the crowd, saying it's because of them that I became an addicted, omnivorous reader. And I just want to thank a great and inspiring teacher. And all of you in this room obviously had such, and they all applauded. And they said, now, Mr. and Ms. Reinhardt, would you stand up? Well, they wouldn't stop applauding for him. And they all got pictures with him, which is okay with me. I just thought it was so exciting.
What a great moment.
He deserved it. He deserved it. By the way, he affected me, but he affected, I think, everyone in my class. And I mean, if they were here, they would all tell you the same thing, I think.
Yeah. I think I know the answer to this question too, but I want to ask it anyway. Growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
I'd say both my parents. My dad was he was stoical, never talked about his pain in that, but just got everything he said he would do, he did, right? Under the limitations of what he had available, because he didn't he didn't have available the kind of reading that I've had. He didn't have available my friend Charlie Tremendous Jones used to say, you're going to be the same person you are today 5 years from now, except for the books you read, the people you meet, and the tapes you listen to. Well, Dad didn't have that. I mean, he had a newspaper, which he couldn't read very well, and National Geographic, where he said, someday I'd like to travel, son. And then my mom was just, she really took care of, I've got, there are 4 boys, and Dad, that's taking care of 5 pieces of giant testosterone is a tough job for any mother, but she was just superb to us.
Oh, that's awesome. At some point, you decide to go to Southern Illinois University. What made you decide to go there? And what's the single most important thing that you learned?
I'd like to do number 2 is more important than why I went there. I looked at 8 universities and I was accepted at all 8 because by the time I'm graduating high school, I was doing really well thanks to a lot of things, Reinhardt particularly. But getting with Buckminster Fuller, what happened is I was going to be a doctor of physiology because the head of physiology was the head of NASA's program physiology, a lovely guy, Alfred Richardson, who did what you and I would agree. He talked to students and asked them, but he said students first, faculty second, administration never. And I'd never heard that kind of thing before. And I go over and learn from him and just sit it. I don't know. He never had time, but he always had time for students. So I was one of the few students who would sit in his, and one day I go there and he says, you got to go hear the smartest guy in the world that's working in NASA. We fly from here, Carbondale, Illinois, down to Houston all the time together. And you got to go meet this guy. And he's talking to 5,000 students at the convention center. We had convocation every week and it was mandatory and really good because the president was so good, Delight Morris of our school, to make sure that you broad spectrum got to hear everybody from a general talk about baby birthing to Dr. Spock, a baby doctor, talking about the war. So we got the full mind. And then later on, the president sent me to all of Asia where we taught teachers to teach. And you'll like this as an interviewer. When I got to Vietnam and I'm flying out every day with Westmoreland in a plane and going like this and bullets going by, I got to be interviewed by Newsweek, Time, and New York Times. And the 3 guys were just a little older than I was. And they said, look, there's only 3 stories here. We just changed the names. There's only who's having sex, what drugs or alcohol are they doing, or who's stealing money. That's all the storylines. And I went, it's that simple? He said, it's that simple. And I've never forgotten that. So, the university, I got Alfred Richardson to finish that story, said, we'll go see Bucky Fuller. Bucky Fuller starts talking. You know the term sophomoric, what means, I'm a sophomore and I know everything, right? Yeah. But Bucky comes out and says, we're going to talk about synergetic energetic geometry, cosmology, epistemology. I'd never heard one of the 10 words. I went, holy cow. I go to his office, begged him to let me work with him, and he did. And he totally changed my thinking of I wrote down because like Elon Musk got hit with somebody like that at Stanford, he wrote his 5 life goals. I wrote down 10 goals because Bucky said, you got to have giant goals that are impossible to achieve during your lifetime. And I, house humanity expeditiously and omniconsiderately. And I wrote down feed on fed humanity. And I'm part of all these kind of programs now that you could never, there's no way for a little 21 or 22-year-old kid people would look at him and they'd laugh. It's just like when I wrote the list I interviewed the 101 best-selling fiction, nonfiction authors. I didn't ask, how do you write, guys and ladies? I asked, how did you market? Mm-hmm. Wayne Dyer, how did you sell so many books, 70 million books, man? How did you do that? These guys, they all, to a man or woman, Danielle Steele, they all told me exactly what they did, but they said, nobody's ever asked us how to market. Everybody asks us how to write. Yeah. I said, I wouldn't be here if I didn't think I could write. Now, I probably could. I write pretty well now at 77 maybe, but I didn't write that well at the beginning, but people still bought it. So I'm very thankful.
So Danielle Steele is one of my mother's favorite authors.
Yeah, she's great. She's formulaic though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every story is going to have, and by the way, they've been made movies and she's got 8 kids and I've been by her house. I've never been in her house, but when we were in San Francisco, we went up to, the hills that she owns the top of, and she owns all the parking spaces on the hill. You learn all these crazy things that you go, wow, that's amazing.
That's so cool. So after Southern Illinois University, where do you go?
Well, SIU gets blown up during Kent State because they're blowing up universities, which is like dumbass squared. And so I went to Colorado, And because I already had a master's degree, I'm teaching at University of Colorado, but I'm also building a dome business, and I'm also teaching at a place called, because I was a little addicted to having fun and working hard. We started a company called Triadome, which we were building out at Boulder Valley Institute. This really rich oil baron bought this 80 acres in Longmont, California, just like 20 minutes out of Boulder, Colorado. And we were just going crazy and having the greatest fun with all the students and teaching them and building stuff. And then I get merged that company into a New York company and blow that out. That's what went bankrupt, because I was building out of PVC at exactly the wrong time, plastic. Yeah. And he said, we can write checks how big your banks will bounce. And it was my best, worst experience. I went bankrupt so fast, Mike, I had to go to the biggest library in the world, New York Public Library. I check a book on how to go bankrupt by yourself. And the bankruptcy courts in the Eastern District of Long Island at that time took everything from you. So, and I don't think that's a good idea, but that's what they used to do. And so I'm with nothing, and I'm unloading toilet paper off a railroad car at $2.14 an hour in a white trench coat and patent leather shoes. And the guy said, "You don't look like you belong here."
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.